ask the business leaders as that do they want to stagnate? Do they want to gradually diminish their companies so that they become obsolete? Or do they want to be on the position of creating a new market all the time and kind of continuing the innovation? And I will have a very general overview on what does it mean that businesses are in a fire and forget mode today, and how do we usher a new era of firing and remembering products, firing and creating new things and building on top of existing wisdom and not always reinventing the wheel. It was 20 years ago, around this time, that I actually finalized the founding papers for Weizen, and I was doing that together with our chairman Ulf Helsinghius, who is also in the audience, which is nice to see. And surprisingly, I think that we have advanced during the last 20 years almost exactly as we planned. Of course, business could always be faster, and let's say there should be more growth, and as in all businesses. But I'm really proud of the team and the achievements that Weizen has been able to create during these 20 years, and now we have a very credible businesses running on Weizen, from telecommunication to shipping to manufacturing to construction and retail. So we are weaving the web for real businesses, and that was our initial intention after the dot-com bubble in the 2000s. So the founding team wanted to be the base for real business, and that's what we are today, and that will be even more exciting tomorrow. That's because more and more companies are realizing that the old ways, or let's say the recent past, is not to be learned from, but sometimes it's the longer past that we need to learn from. So if we look at the waves of innovation, in most of the today's typical enterprises, how we see it, that many times they reinvent the wheel over and over again. So just the day before yesterday, we were hearing about the rotor sails. That is actually an innovation from the 1920s. However, there was only one person and one company trying to push that through. So it kind of fell into unknown. So people didn't really put more effort to that. And for 100 years, it lay dormant. The wisdom was there and knowledge was there, but the product actually could not reach the market. And it's usually the one human age that kind of is the limit of knowledge and wisdom. And we think that this shouldn't be the case with our current digital tools and the capabilities that our kind of platforms are bringing to the market. And when the wisdom is lost, for many, especially stock-listed companies, that seems to be okay, because people are so used to this kind of consumable industry that you just buy new things and throw old things away, and then you just haul all the waste with large container ships to India or China, and then buy back the natural resources. But if you look at the big picture, this is not sustainable, and it doesn't make even business sense, only in the short term. But in the long term, we cannot continue like this. So we need to resist the old thinking that we don't care about the customers. So what I want to ask the business leaders is that do they want to stagnate? Do they want to gradually diminish their companies so that they become obsolete? Or do they want to be on the position of creating a new market all the time and kind of continuing the innovation. And one of the kind of 100-year-old, more than 100-year-old invention is digital technology. And I wrote a blog entry some months ago about a digital telegraph, which was actually optical telegraph from the 1600s onwards. So people were developing quite a lot of semaphore technologies so that optical telegraph could be used. So you could send a message from Stockholm to St. Petersburg through a network of towers where people were showing different semaphores, which are kind of painted signs towards the next tower. And this was digital communication because it was difficult to spot sometimes during the fog. So the technologies like error correction and encryption and very efficient way of sending valuable messages were developed. And this then was transformed towards the telegraph network, which was already electrical, and but still the communication mode was digital. But then at the end of 1800s, we started utilizing voice communication on the top of these lines, and people were so excited that they could call first within their countries, their neighbors and distant relatives, and all the way to international calls throughout the continents. And this innovation was kind of enough. So for almost 100 years, the telecom industry didn't come up with anything better than the kind of crappy 8 kilobit voice communication, because it was they mostly used their development resources to create more efficient billing for customers so that they could extract money out of it. But the digital innovations of the past were forgotten, and it was only with the GSM like 20, 30 years ago where we kind of reinvented the digital communication, and that then created the internet. It created all kinds of new opportunities like the web and the social media. So we had a long period of nothing, and then we suddenly ended up with new innovations. And if we look at the ancient days, when there was a village blacksmith, for instance, in a small village, that kind of service provider had very intimate customer relationships, and there was a guarantee that when this kind of service provider took care of all the village plows and other iron tools, each customer product was customized so that there was warranty for it, and there was also gradual improvement of the service. However, when we then moved to mass production at the end of 1800s with the first industrial revolution, that kind of personalizing the customer relationship, it was almost forgotten, because the kind of one-time use products even for plows and agricultural products that became so cheap that it was forgotten almost completely. But I think that we lost at that point the idea of sustainability and kind of thinking long term for the customer relationships, and with new kinds of digital twins and spines, we can actually get this back on a global scale. So now the limit is not the village anymore; it's the infamous global village, that we can actually connect any kind of service provider to any customer at any point in the world. And we see that with having digital twins and making the digital twin spine the primary merchandise instead of talking about the physical goods. We can actually transform the industry to make it more sustainable, whether it's a sock manufacturer or a rotor sail manufacturer or a shipping company. The real value is actually in the digital data, in the digital entities, in machine learning capabilities. So we see that there shouldn't be any product today which would not have a digital trail or a full digital twin. And we should actually push manufacturing companies to take more and more full life cycle care, and not necessarily through legislation, because we think that the best innovations are coming out of freedom, so that companies can really innovate and compete with sustainability instead of being forced upon carbon credits and these kind of things. If a company takes a full life cycle care for its products, that's actually very sustainable business. And luckily, we do see in our customer portfolio quite a lot of this thinking now. For instance, with KONE, we see that almost 60% of the revenue is already in service sales and selling the lifting service instead of selling just the elevators and escalators. However, this is not an easy thing to change. It can't be just kind of read from a book and then changed overnight, because it goes all the way down to the benefit models for the employees and also kind of a long-term thinking. It's interesting to see, for instance, the current car industry that you have. If you buy a, let's say, 20,000 euro car, right now the digital connection to yourself is mostly about entertainment, and the car manufacturer doesn't use almost any of the data to sell you a new car in the next 3 years or 4 years. There is the connection is almost lost, even though massive amount of money is used for this other kind of digital marketing and kind of the spare part sales, but the model is so rigid that only some of the new electric car manufacturers like Tesla have been able to foster a new relationship with customers. So I urge you to, as senior leadership, I urge you to kind of think different now on how you can utilize your existing customer relationships by introducing new products which are real, which are not just add-ons to your physical product. They're not just portals. They are not just self-care, but they are actually at the heart of your product from today to the future. And in 2013, I first time I wrote a small blog entry about socks as a service. So that was a kind of a poking fun of SaaS at the time, because SaaS was a new thing in 2013. But now it's 2021, and I still haven't seen any company selling textiles as a service. So sock manufacturing is actually very unsustainable right now, because it's mostly based on materials that are derived from oil, and people just use their socks and then they go and buy new ones. So we have seen taxi industry change a lot. We have seen hotel industry, food delivery change quite a lot. But textile industry doesn't change almost at all. But I think that there might be same kind of breakthroughs coming up. And as said, we need several components, like one of our base industries, which is telecom industry. That the telecom reliability and connectivity is absolutely required, and the telcos actually have the customer relationships to most of these customers that we need to push to be sustainable. And I think that we're going to see quite many surprises on how the products will look like in the coming 2, 3, or even 5 years from now, because the sustainability, it will hit hard many companies unless they take their own initiative first. And when we see that the digital twins for all of the products, and when you say digital twin, it might sound like a secondary thing, but as said, your thinking should start that that your customer relationship is the product. And so how do you multiply that? How do you foster? How do you make that grow at all points? Well, it won't work in one sentence, but I would say that the spine is the digital brain for all things physical. So in 2012, in IEEE Technology Time Machine, where I presented the paper the first time, it was actually Eric, our CTO, who coined it quite nicely, that it is the ephemeral soul of all things computing. But that doesn't necessarily say too much for people. But the spine, compared to digital twin, it's the primary merchandise, as said, because digital twin is usually considered a replica, a copy, a simulation of a complex machine or a process. But in spine, it's the other way around, that we first create the idea, the programming, and everything that is required digitally for the product, and then start thinking that that how much physics do we need around it. So that's the main difference between SPIME and digital twin, although they are each other's evolution in a way.
What do you think about the role of 3D printing in the digital era? Is that something connected to the digital twin in general?
We have actually advocated digital twins with 3D printing for almost since inception of Bayesen, because I think that the more economical and practical the 3D printers become, the more important the intellectual property will become that is hosted somewhere securely. So in the best case, I would see that when you have aluminium cans at home, you wouldn't actually recycle them by transporting them to some recycler, but you would actually just put them to a home recycler, which would combine as a 3D printer. So when you happen to need a spare part to your car, you would just print it locally. And this is technically possible already. It might be a little bit expensive now, but it becomes more and more economical. But in order to achieve this, you will need the digital infrastructure to make it happen. So 3D printing is definitely one of the key drivers for our kind of platforms and digital twins and spines.
How do you see, Pasi, IPR of the digitalized solutions? Not only in the privacy term like the GDPR, but as well the patents and that kind of issues, are they in danger?
Patent as a concept will prevail, and as you can see back there are our 7 patents for SPIME and our technologies. However, I think that the patent must evolve into something that is alive, because right now patent is a paper and text and flowcharts that are sent to someone to be reviewed and compared to other prior art. But in the future, I see that even a spine could be patented as such, so that it's almost like a living entity that that can execute, that can morph into something together with machine learning and AI technologies. But certainly the looking at the patents, sometimes when we have been issued patents, the language is it's almost like a programming language, because you need to know exactly what kind of terms you can use when you compare technologies and when you talk about the different use cases. So it is fairly detached from the digital reality right now. So that's why I think that there will be changes, but as a concept, the patent will certainly prevail. This is actually a very good question, and it's all about the trust. I think that some of the big actors, the cloud providers and the social media companies, they have done a disservice to the industry by kind of flagging that they will analyze anything anyway. And that's why our kind of companies have a little bit of catching up to retain the trust from even consumers using those vacuum cleaners and such. So the keys to sharing the data with anyone else should always be at the consumer. So that they make the decisions. People are willing to share the data when they can be sure that it's only used for the purposes that they have decided upon.
Indeed. Are there other technologies driving the digital transformation, others than the digital twin that is kind of the hot topic of the day?
Well, looking at the bleeding edge technologies, I would bet on quantum computing, because that may change the face of AI completely, with completely new capabilities on parallel analysis of things. So we might be seeing the emergence of consciousness in some of the algorithms, which is scary and exciting at the same time.